Hello, BookTube. I've got a little mail for you today, some periodicals and one package snatched from the porch on a very damp and rainy day. A dark, damp, and rainy day. It's still way too warm. It's still 30 degrees warmer than it should be. But dark clouds and rain moved in last night. And when I look at the system that's bringing this, I don't see the usual thing, a big clot of something that's moving up the eastern seacoast of the United States and is going to pass through Boston and then move off to Nova Scotia. Instead, I see something coming from the upper Midwest in what looks like a gigantic river that may stick around for a while. The forecasts up until yesterday, all the best extrapolation of this data up until yesterday, up until last night, was saying that Boston could have 5 days of rain. Intermittent rain, not constant, but 5 days before this system is gone. That has never turned out to be true. Every time a prediction like that is made, it turns out to be false, and the rain is gone in a day. I am counting on that. The sun, even now as I make this video, is trying to come out. So I'm counting on that. I'm certainly hoping for it because my little dog does not like the rain at all. Not at all. She hates it. In fact, virulently hates it. She doesn't even like when the ground is wet, even when it's not raining anymore. Last night, I was blissfully reading in bed. I was reading on my Samsung, on my one tablet to rule them all. Can you imagine, after all this time, fiddling around with iPads of every kind of description? One of you was kind enough to send me a Samsung Galaxy tablet, and it turned out to be the one tab to rule them all. I'm inseparable from it. Absolutely inseparable from it. Except for the bathroom. Okay? I know this is going to strike you young people as very weird. Certainly strikes my surly houseboy as very weird. But I find it intensely confusing that people bring sensitive electronics into the only room in the house that has standing water. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? No, Herodotus is fine for the bathroom. but all the rest of the time, this thing is with me everywhere. And I was blissfully reading on that last night. It was around 3:30, 3 or 3:30, something like that, when the first rain started. At first, every time I think is a bug hitting the window or something like that, and then I realized no, it's rain hitting the window. And my little bean was sound. She's sound asleep right next to me now, but she was sound asleep, down by my knees on the bed last night, sound asleep. And when she heard that, it didn't actually wake her up, but it did penetrate her unconscious to the point where she sidled all the way up to my armpit, just sort of snuggled in there like that, as sort of an unconscious protest, would I please make the rain go away? So I don't know. I don't know what to report. We'll see what tomorrow is like. I think that the rain has stopped for the day. I find it hard to believe that it will return. It is predicted to be here all week long, but we shall see. But the mail was certainly interesting. It's not the pile of packages that I would like. When I see the U.S. mail truck go by, I love the driver. She and I talk all the time when we meet, when we're out and about walking. We always run into her, and she's a delight. And whenever I see her driving by, I always painfully look to see, do you have anything for me? Maybe something for me? And that's kind of silly, because I get a ton of ebooks from publishers, and they all go on that Samsung tablet. So they're right there on the best tablet in the world to read on. Even the form factor, just everything about it. But even so, I pined for the mail truck. But even though it wasn't 100 packages, it's still interesting. And we have one that we can open together, but we also have periodicals. I got a bunch of periodicals, including a bunch of square-bound periodicals that were very conscientiously wrapped in plastic against the weather. The first one, I re-upped my subscription to Reader's Digest. Can't help myself. I did. I like this magazine. I just like it. What can I say? Maybe I'm some sort of senior citizen deep on the inside. That is, spiritually, a senior citizen. On the outside, I am a bee-sting-lipped, snug-nosed, wide-shouldered, A-frame, eight-pack washboard abs, smoldering, come-hither-look 28-year-old with raven hair, as you can see. It's pretty well known, right? Maybe not to everybody. I don't know how many of you will ever look at the comments field of my video, but I got a doozy of a comment the other day. on my Dune video, I believe. Yeah, it was on the Dune video. Someone whose name is a business, so they might be a bot, left a comment saying that, if only your background were sexier. There really doesn't take much work. You could easily make a sexier background, maybe some minimal edits, a little flash and dazzle. You would have millions of viewers. I was read the comment and thought, well, you're not an old hand here, are you? I don't want millions of viewers. I don't want anything like that. I am not a normal YouTuber. This is a 12-nay channel. We are never going to reach 12K. And I made the mistake of leaving that comment. Take it a little piece of advice from a 28-year-old who's been around the block. Never leave a response to a comment anywhere, not just YouTube, but Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever. Never respond to a comment that isn't made by a person. The way you know whether it's made by a person or not is it'll have a person's name on it. If it doesn't have a person's name on it, it's probably not made by a person. This one certainly did a convincing approximation of being a person, sounded like a person. And I thought, once I clued them in and said, okay, you're confusing me with a YouTuber who's monetizing up to his eyeballs and will show you heart medicine commercials and trailers for the Eternals before they talk to. This is not that kind of channel. I don't want millions of viewers. I thought maybe I covered the ground there. But no, this bot came back and said, the same thing is true for my personal appearance. A little dab will do you, that maybe if I fix things just a little, I'd be more aesthetically pleasing to look at. Again, I was just laughing. I was reading this comment and just laughing. I was thinking what the rest of you would make of because, of course, if you've been here for 1,000 videos or 2,000 videos or 3,000 videos or 4,000 videos, then you already know how funny such comments are. I don't know what they're going to do next. I mean, what else is there? Just intense monetization, I guess, is the next step in the chain here. Smash that like button. Be sure to hit the bell for notifications and spread this video far and wide. That's how the algorithm picks it up. You really help. All those calls to action. That's what will be next. Calls to action. When the most common call to action on this channel is me asking you for your mailing address so I can send you a book. It's like I say, this is the weirdest parasocial relationship on YouTube. But I resubscribed to Reader's Digest. They sent me a little card. They asked for $10. I sent them a check. And I love it. I certainly get my subscriptions money out of it. This issue has, as you can see, delete your internet footprint. There's a long article in here. Reader's Digest is often maligned by Weisenheimers as a little magazine designed to scare senior citizens. I don't know that that's entirely true. There's lots of humor in it, too, and lots of helpful health advice. It is definitely aimed at an older audience. And there's an article in here on the dark web that is so light on facts that it is definitely designed to scare senior citizens. But there are two articles in this issue that I really liked. One of them was deleting your internet footprint. We'll look at that. There's another one on the benefits of writing. Write. Whether it's a keyboard, if your fingers and your eyes are in good enough shape to use a keyboard, or longhand with pen and paper, but write. And the article very helpfully lists some of the benefits. Let's find out who that article is by. If I'm gonna praise it, I should give them the credit they deserve. Yeah, there's a dark web article with a hooded hacker just sort of lurking over the keyboard. The article is by Elizabeth Bernstein. And underneath her name, it says, from the Wall Street Journal. So I don't know if this article is from the Wall Street Journal or if she's from the Wall Street Journal. But it's called How to Work Out Your Worries by Writing. I think it even has a couple of, it has guidelines. Set aside time alone. Think short term. Pick your medium. In other words, keyboard, pen and paper, that sort of thing. Choose a topic. Let sleeping dogs lie. Make your connections. Give your advice. Don't limit yourself. Don't share. Oh. Our writing changes when we know others are going to read it. Your goal is to be honest with yourself. You can be honest with yourself, even knowing that others are going to read your writing. Granted, no practitioners of 21st century literary fiction can be, but it is possible for older and normal people to be that way. You certainly want to share it with me. Power through and move on. Well, those are pretty good pieces of advice. But I hadn't looked at the inset, but the article is something, of course, that I second. Of course, I second that you should write. Everyone should write. But the main article is about deleting your internet footprint. I thought we'd go over the bullet points here. Number one is mix up your passwords. Don't use the same password for every single site and use it over and over again. Change it up all the time. The cyber computer, I know 5 computer people, 2 of them make a very good living doing computer related stuff on YouTube, and have long since stopped giving me the kind of advice that bot gave about fix your appearance, fix your editing, you'll get millions of viewers. They say use some sort of a password protector and change everything once a week. Just change it all once a week. Make yourself unhackable to the extent that you can. Number 2 is use a password manager, again, like I mentioned. Number 3 is find out whether criminals have your information. Visit haveibeenpwned.com to see whether your email address, phone number, or passwords are included in any leaked databases. Spoiler, your information has probably been involved in multiple leaks. Number 4 is delete old accounts. Number 5 is download your data. Number 6 is find old accounts to delete. So not just the ones you know about, find the old ones that are still operating somewhere. They're wide open back doors to everything about you. And if you think that they aren't because the credit card they were linked to has now been invalidated, you're on a different credit card with a new expiration date, that sort of thing, you're dead wrong. And there is, I believe they mention, you probably don't remember every online account you've ever created. To find old accounts you might want to delete, search your emails for terms like welcome, verify your account, and free trial. But there are also apps that you can use to find, watchtower apps that you can use to find everything that you've ever done. Number 7 is delete old emails too. I use Gmail. That's probably a really bad idea. Considering in light of this article, that's probably a really bad idea. And I think that Gmail does delete old emails just on a continuing basis, figuring that people won't want to delete them on their own, but that if they don't ever think to consult them, they won't really notice or care if you're deleting them. Number 8 is search your username online. Number 9 is hide social media profiles from search engines. Number 10 is control social media privacy settings, very important. And number 11 is delete old social media posts. Number 12 is opt out of People Finder websites. Number 13 is know how California's new Privacy Act affects you. The California Consumer Privacy Act took effect on January 1st, 2020. If you are a California resident, it gives you the right to know what data company is collecting, tell it to stop sending yours, and request that it be deleted. Number 14 is search with DuckDuckGo. This is one of the problems that I have with Reader's Digest, is that they tend to bury or even actively hide whether or not a piece has been sponsored, paid for. When they mention something like this, that automatically sets up a red flag, especially since it has the only graphic in the article. And it's... the number 14 is search with DuckDuckGo. And number 15 is tell Google to stop tracking you. Number 16 is limit who has your location history. 17 is configure your browser for privacy. A lot of browsers make that very easy nowadays. Number 18 is use a VPN, except a lot of VPNs have been hacked. Number 19 is go incognito. And number 20 is switch to privacy-friendly apps. Number 21 is seek out end-to-end encryption. So in other words, it doesn't really help you much if you're encrypting everything at your end, but it's not encrypted at the other end. It's still a wide open door. Number 22 is take advantage of Apple's new privacy features. Readers Digest can occasionally be naive. That is unbelievably naive. That is unbelievably naive. That's like the take advantage of Apple's new privacy features. Like I don't even know. It's like Beowulf trying to take advantage of the new vulnerability feature that the dragon has told him is on the dragon's own body. It's not going to work. It's going to hurt you. Number 23 is protect your mail. Number 24 is remove saved payment details. And number 25 is be careful about sharing info. And the article goes into a great deal of detail on all of those. Very interesting. Uh, so not, I mean, this issue alone would be fine for the pittance that I paid for this thing. Then we have the next square-bound things are the new Asimov's and Analog that I subscribe to. There is a woman swimming with a dolphin in a bio suit of armor. Analog has fact-based features as well as fiction. The fact-based features here are, will nuclear power save us from global warming? And of course it would, but it won't. It won't be, you have to embrace it or it won't save you from anything. I love these things so much. I mean, I think they're like $35 a year to subscribe to each one of them. Think about a new science fiction novel. A new science fiction novel is about $30 for one novel. And it's almost certainly going to be terrible, right? It's almost certainly going to be diversity coached, forced virtue signaling crap. You could get a collection of short stories, but a lot of that'll cost you $30 as well, and a lot of those will be really bad. And what you're looking for here is not a passable reading experience, right? You're looking for something that sets your hairs on end, that makes you just thrilled to be reading it, thrilled, so that nothing could distract you. You're not going to do anything until you finish this story. That's a great feeling. I believe all readers are actually in reading for that feeling. You get that at least once in every single issue of Asimov's and Analog. Every single issue. And the $30 gets you 6 issues a year of each. so that add in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, you've got 3 square bounds that are giving you that kind of feeling at least once in every issue. The bargain speaks for itself. And I also got a periodical that is not square bound. I got Harper's, the new Harper's. The main article here is about the battle over outer space, which is very interesting. All about how the International Space Treaty says that you can't have nukes in outer space. But other than that, it leaves everything up for grabs. The piece is by Rachel Reederer, and it was very, very good. Very ominous, of course, because, space is over all our heads, but still. But what else do we have in here? Let's see here. Who is this? Jeremy Miller does a long piece that was really good about the census, the United States Census, and how effed up it is. Yes, there's an article, a memoir here, Portrait of a Coyote as a Young Man, by David Truer that I haven't read. I skipped it because 21st century memoirs tend to irritate me to such an extent that I just it ends up being the opposite. Whatever the opposite is, the hair's going down on your arm. Then Laura Pendergrass did a piece on Boris Johnson and his wife redecorating number 10 Downing Street, and it goes on. The piece expands to be much more than that. It expands to be these warring factions in Whitehall and all about who about Boris Johnson, but where the lines of loyalty are you okay with his new wife or are you not? It's just horrifying to think of. Then we get to the fiction. Harper's, of course, has a short story in every issue. The short story in this issue is January by Andrew Martin. Andrew Martin will be familiar to a lot of you for writing Sally Rooney-esque fiction. He wrote a novel called Early Work and a collection of short stories called Cool for America, which are about nihilistic young sexists smoking on back porches. It's Sally Rooney territory, right down the line. Why it hasn't made Andrew Martin a squintillionaire like it has Sally Rooney, I don't really know, unless it's just that he's, a cishet white man. And so we can't venerate him to that extent. But I looked at the story and thought, okay, the story's called January. Is it going to be along the same lines as the things that he has written? So let's read a little about it, shall we? Let's read a little of this story and find out. The day Aaron finished rehab. Well, there we go. Cassie picked him up and drove him to New York City. Though they lived in Boston, and the facility was north in New Hampshire, it seemed obvious to her that Boston was no place to celebrate, if celebrate was the right word. For one, it was Boston. And second, it was the site of Aaron's most recent bout of trouble. Even if they would be returning soon enough, it seemed to her a kindness to prolong the time away as much as possible. New York, she knew, had its own triggers, even if Aaron claimed not to believe in the concept. But it still felt to her like the best place for them to be. It was where they'd met and spent their first happy years together, and besides, there was just so much more to do there. I should point out here that the word Boston and the word do are in italics. This short story has lots of italicized words. And the only reason I point that out is because this isn't nonfiction. This is fiction. And in fiction, as an author, you should be able to direct your reader to what is emphasized without using italics. But maybe it's a 21st century thing. I think we might need to spend some time someplace at that place again, he said quietly. That was 2 months ago as she drove him home from jail. It would be his second time at that place since they'd been together, and his third overall. It made her sad and weary, but she couldn't quite summon anger. The wan, washed-out emotional wreckage of the character. Very Sally Rooney-esque. The Sally Rooney characters think about feeling things, but they don't ever actually feel things. They think about it, and they sort of sometimes discuss which thing would really be appropriate to do here. It's the Xanax generation, trying to approximate what it would feel like to have real emotions. He was smart and kind, and when he was sober, and a weeping, pants-pissing idiot when he drank. They told most people, or allowed most people to believe, that he was going to an artist residency for a month, something he had in fact done in the past. Saying New Hampshire to their writer friends was like saying New Haven to a certain overlapping kind of person. They just assumed you were being discreet about your good fortune. It wasn't that she was so afraid of judgment. It was no secret that Aaron was something of a mess. He wrote about it, quite successfully, though he assured those who were concerned by the material that it was exaggerated for effect. Sure, he'd embarrassed himself at a few parties, but he never actually is also in italics. For example, blacked out while camping with Cassie, gotten lost in the woods, broken his ankle after falling in a ravine, and nearly frozen to death while passed out in his own vomit, as his avatar did in a story he'd published in a prestigious low-circulation journal last summer. He'd only sprained his ankle, but the rest, unfortunately, was true. This is a 21st century writer of autofiction commenting on the ubiquity and also the almost pinpoint accuracy of autofiction instead of, I don't know, doing something else, writing about the Crusades. Okay, so maybe she was is italicized, a bit afraid of judgment. People felt a certain way about charming ne'er-do-wells. They often felt quite differently about lying alcoholics. He was waiting on the little sidewalk behind the facility when she arrived to pick him up, his enormous rolling suitcase standing between him and the discharge nurse like a stout, unloved child. I think it needs pointing out to the audience that I'm reading to here, but I'll point it out anyway. You'll notice that this story is startlingly well written. Okay? Props where they're due. This is a joy to read. Hello, face, he said. This was a reference to something. If she'd ever known its origin, she'd forgotten it. It was what he always said when they'd been apart for a length of time greater than a day. Hey, you, she said. She'd ended up missing him even more than she expected to. Now, here's where your antenna should go on alert, because in anime-choked 21st century literary fiction, the women have their existence in the men. If the fiction is written by a man, then the women will exist because of the men. They will be homunculi of the men. They will be handheld sock puppets. It will be clear, although they have lots of great zingers, lots of great lines, and a couple of great traumatic scenes in every wan, washed-out novel, it'll be pretty clear that they don't have any actual agency other than the men. Other than that they gain from the men. So when you read a line, she'd ended up missing him more than she expected to, you worry. And you're right to, because the paragraph goes on. For the first week he was away, she felt the relief and pleasure of not needing to answer to another person. She could take an edible as soon as she got home from work, watch gentle French comedies about amicable divorce, eat old olives and cheese from the fridge for dinner, masturbate. But this freedom soon became its own stultifying routine, and she missed the way she bent her life around Aaron's. His mysterious excitements and longueurs provided a sense of event that she couldn't conjure on her own. So when we get that checklist, take an edible as soon as she gets home from work, eat old olives and cheese, watch French comedies, masturbate. Notice There's no person there. We're getting an enumerated list of the things that Cassie does when she's not taking care of Aaron, but there's not much to it. There's no person there. Anyway, after a few minutes of cheery, if not particularly edifying conversation, he fell asleep with his head wedged against the window. He'd started taking Zoloft again at the facility, despite which, he said, he rarely slept more than a few hours at a time, being in a strange bed in, one might say, less than ideal circumstances. All of that, less than ideal circumstances, is italicized. But now, relief plus Zoloft plus a steadily moving vehicle driven by his one, in parentheses, question mark, true, in parentheses, question mark, love, in parentheses, question mark, knocked him straight out. The succession there of question marks in parentheses is a tick that runs not only through this story, but through all of 21st century 20-something tobacco addict idetto-fiction, auto-fiction, this sloppy, wan, thin, uncommitted, Sally Rooney quasi-fiction. The thing that runs throughout it all is that nothing is ever really anything. I mean, like, whatever. I don't know. I was drunk, or whatever. I love you, or whatever. I'm feeling really a lot of hate right now for my father, or something. It always does that. All the time. All of the exponents of this kind of fiction do this. All the time. So that you're left just wanting to grasp onto things and you can't. You can't do it. Because, there's lots of alcohol and there's tobacco and there are edibles and I guess, and I like whatever. I don't know. I like whatever. Okay, so who are you? So what do you think about? So what do you care about? So where do you draw the line? I don't know, whatever. It's not really written that way. It's cannily meant to appeal to people who believe they are like that. And the only way you believe that you are like that is if you are convinced on some very bedrock level that you have about 1 million years to live. But anyway, he looked like he'd lost weight in the months since she'd last seen him. In one of this, I want to stress here the unreality here. We're told in this story, we've already been told that he doesn't believe in triggers. We're going to be told in a minute that he doesn't believe in hitting rock bottom, the concept of hitting rock bottom. But he's been in rehab for a month. And it's not the first time that he's been in rehab. It seems unlikely to me that the character would not believe these things. But anyway, in one of their semi-weekly phone calls from the approved landline, he'd been complimentary about the food. He'd been more or less complimentary about everything, certainly more positive than he'd been at home in at least a year, or maybe ever. So she's been living with this guy for a year, and he's more positive about everything in rehab than he ever was when they were living together. She hoped that this had something to do with hitting bottom, another thing Aaron did not believe in, but she suspected otherwise. His periods of sanguinity were most often the result of sex, actual, imagined, or immediately anticipated. This had admittedly not been much in abundance in any form through Cassie in the months leading up or during his time away. It was hard, it turned out, to work up enthusiasm for sex with a very drunk, depressed person. Though she had tried. She was hoping that if he was now less depressed and not drinking, they might be able to get back into it. How is he? How's he doing? Has he been psychologically scarred? Does he have any plans to build his future? Well, we'll get to that. The main thing is, can we have sex? Are we going to have good sex? Sex, and it goes on. You might think that was just a gesture in the direction of the least consequential thing in the world. But no, the next long paragraph goes on. Sex had not been a particular problem with them traditionally. It was likely that what kept them together during the early years, their way of making up, of rediscovering a common language after one or another of his voyages into the ether. These voyages not infrequently involved the romantic company of other women, and on at least one occasion that she knew of, a man. Oh, it was platonic, he'd said about that one, eyebrow raised, deeply so. He would usually confess that he'd fooled around, but for whatever reason, either because it was true or because it was a narrative structure he could not imagine his way beyond. Who knows, one way or another, right? Who really cares? Like, whatever. It's either true or it's not true. He would always insist that nothing more serious had happened, which meant, in practical terms, that they could continue having unprotected sex. There was a grim exultation in not quite believing him, in allowing him to get away with this, even at the risk of her own health. though after a couple of more of his extended absences, she'd insisted, despite his protestations, that he get tested before she let him back into their bed. She'd had her own minor dalliances in this part to curb her resentment of his, though she had been extremely careful. Had is in italics. Although the italics in this case should be she, right? It's just she had been extremely careful. But anyway, for her own sake and secondarily for Aaron's. And it turns out later in the story that she's talking about her own dalliances, including she's a teacher at a school in the city, and it turns out that one of her colleagues has made it perfectly clear that he'd be happy to shack up with her for the rest of his life, and she's dreamed about it. But she also dreams about the cute girl on the corner. Because, who's binary anymore? I mean, am I attracted to women? I guess I am, whatever. She wasn't sure about the logistics of having an affair at an upscale rehab facility. The program featured gender-separate accommodations, but she knew that, at the very least, some meals and group therapy sessions were mixed. And Aaron needed, on average, about 15 minutes to develop an infatuation. For those of you keeping score at home, we are now on our third paragraph about sex. In the reflections of a character who is driving her lover home from rehab, especially in an isolated setting. And the options were surely tantalizing. Rich girls, too smart for their own good, addicted to drugs that made them thin and volatile. And he, an author, even if by the odds no one he met there would have read a word he'd written, attractive in his own louche, overgrown baby kind of way, deeply sympathetic to their stories, maybe even planning to write about them someday. Write about them is in italics. His only type, he would tell them, was interesting, and if their particular malady did not qualify for whatever reason, they would find ways, she imagined, to make it do so. He was snoring loudly and irregularly with what she hoped was not sleep apnea. She doesn't know because, who knows? Who pays attention to these things? Whatever. At home, it was so rare for him to fall asleep before she did that she genuinely didn't know whether he usually snored or not. In the mornings, when she got out of bed, almost always before him, he was often so quiet that she was afraid he was dead. But he never was. God forbid. This thing might have veered into an interesting story. She tried now to adjust NPR so that it covered up some of the sound he was making without startling him awake. A segment was documenting the travails of a wind farm on the U.S.-Mexico border run jointly by the ex-Border Patrol agents and formerly undocumented Central American laborers. Quote, "We want to work, we are ready to forgive," said a chirpy voice in English over what sounded like a much more complicated statement in the original Spanish. Aaron was practically swimming in the pink-striped button-down shirt he was wearing. It had never fit him properly, and now that he was a little thinner, it looked like some kind of private joke. If she bought him an article of clothing, she had to be damn sure she liked it, because unless it fit so badly that he couldn't physically wrangle it onto his body or got lost or ruined in some misadventure, she knew she would be seeing it every week for years to come. Cassie's own style had emerged in her mid-20s after an athletic, sartorially indifferent extended adolescence. One weekend, she accidentally borrowed a friend's hot pink leather jacket that had been left in her car and wore it out over a ripped Rage Against the Machine t-shirt her brother had given her when she was 12. It felt great. It's been about a year since we were reading about our story. She's driving her boyfriend home, I guess, like whatever, from rehab. But we've dealt with, he's gone to sleep. I wonder if we're going to have sex. I wonder if it'll be better than the sex we used to have. He's snoring really weird. I wonder if he has sleep apnea. Is he alive? I don't really know. And that shirt really is big on him. Reminds me of all the shirts I've worn in my life. Aaron woke up in Connecticut, a little past Hartford. "Oh, hello again," he said. He blinked at her, genuinely puzzled, it seemed, by the circumstances. "Good morning," she said. "How long did I sleep?" "A couple hours. You were a tired boy." "I guess, yeah," he said. He instinctively started hitting the radio presets on the dashboard. None of them yielded anything he wanted to hear because they were out of range of the Boston stations they had been set to. He started scanning and settled in on some up-tempo jazz. Coltrane? She thought everything was Coltrane. She was often right. Whatever. I mean, it's either Coltrane or it's not. Like whatever. I don't know. "So what are we going to do?" Aaron said, "in general, but also in New York." "So okay," she said, "I have a plan. We don't have to go if you aren't up for it, but I got us tickets to the opera tonight. It's supposed to be a good one, but not like a buzzy one for whatever reason. So tickets were actually pretty cheap. So it's fine if you'd rather skip it. But I thought it would be a nice treat. The tickets had, in fact, been quite expensive, and she knew, since he was the one who usually bought the tickets, that he probably knew this. Why does she lie to him? Whatever, I don't know. That he probably knew this. But it was important that she give him a plausible out, even if it was more or less a given that he felt obliged to act excited and grateful. She thought they needed to have an option of an activity that would occupy a significant span of time and take place in a zone that was familiar and comfortable. But she also didn't want to throw him into the act of socializing yet. They were staying in a hotel that night, using a gift card they'd received from her father 2 Christmases ago, but never had reason to use. It was for a moderately fancy hotel that allowed dogs because they'd been planning to get a dog. Now, of course, she wanted to think about having kids, and they still hadn't managed to agree on a dog, not even a cat. Pets as trainer animals for children, after which the pets can be neglected. And also, she didn't want to throw him into socializing, but she got tickets to the opera. The next night, they were scheduled to stay at Mark and Gilbert, who were among the few friends who had known the true nature of Aaron's residency. Also, their only close friends who still lived in Manhattan. One of the side priorities of a trip was to stay out of Brooklyn, both because of the rest of her friends lived there, and also because there was nothing to do there but drink. That's a very good dig, I'll admit. She hoped they would spend their Saturdays like a couple of rich tourists. Brunch at some bright, Instagrammable Israeli place in Soho, book browsing at Housing Works and McNally, an afternoon at either the Met or the New Whitney, which was no longer very new. Was she being insane in her optimism? She thought it was all right to strive for an ideal, maybe, even if its realization was more or less impossible. Story goes on from there. It goes on from there. There's a 500-word stretch where they're driving along and she really needs to pee. And then she needs to pee really bad, and then it gets so bad that she thinks she's going to explode because she really needs to pee, and she's just hoping to find a service station with a bathroom. He suggests that they pull over, and maybe she could pee by the side of the road, but she doesn't want to do that. She thinks maybe she's going to have to pee in a cup, but eventually, lo and behold, there is a service station with a bathroom. This is a short story. You've read as many treatises about short stories as I have. Everything in it is supposed to mean something. Everything in it is supposed to be working double duty. It's like working on a small skiff. Everything has to be crucial. What's the part about the musing about sex comes back later in the story. The whole bit about needing to pee? No. They get to a hotel, and she has an expensive, elaborate vibrator that is designed to get him going. To get him aroused, because apparently the only thing she's thinking about, taking her boyfriend home from rehab, where he's been for a month, and not for the first time, is sex. It just keeps coming up over and over in the story, and he falls asleep instead of being aroused. And eventually he wakes up and they go to the opera. And she is worried the whole time. She's thinking this is too much for him. He actually starts to cry. And the scenes at the opera are really, really good. But there's also a point. The part of the story that is terrific is brief. I want to read you that bit, then we'll move on. Because they're at intermission at the opera, and he's clearly overwhelmed. It was a bad idea to go to the opera. He's trying not to seem that way. He's utterly denying it. He wants to go back in for more. She offers, when she sees that he's on the edge of a breakdown, she offers, let's just quit. We've seen enough opera for one night. But the intermission bell rings. The intermission bells were dinging, and the lights had begun to flash on and off. A few months later, when it became clear that neither they nor anyone else would be going to the theaters of any kind for a very long time, she remembered this moment. In other words, although it doesn't say so, the story is set immediately pre-COVID. If she had known what was coming, the grief and the loneliness, the full banishment from the places that had sustained her for so much of her life, would she have insisted against her better judgment that they stay? She wanted, then, to hear the awaited aria almost as much as she wanted to comfort Aaron. Later, when the full scale of the loss became clear, she thought reproachfully that Aaron would have been just fine sitting through one more act, maybe two. He wouldn't have been any worse in the audience, his hands on hers, than in the hotel room. It was fine to cry at the opera. It was perfectly natural. And the ending of the story is poignant, but needless to say, this Andrew Martin character exhibits many Sally Rooney aspects that I deeply dislike in contemporary fiction. Just to put it mildly. And then we have the new book section by Claire Massoud, which is a roundup. I've mentioned roundups a few times on this channel, where the author has only a couple of hundred words to deal with each of the books. But the the centerpiece of the book's coverage brings us full circle with the Andrew Martin short story, because it's a long review of that new Richard Zenith Pessoa biography that I read and reviewed. And the review is written by Benjamin Kunkel, who might as well be Aaron in the Andrew Martin story, and so we come full circle. I kept expecting Benjamin Kunkel in the course of his review to mention how much he really does love Cassie. But thankfully, we also have a package. So let's take a look at this. All right, it's a finished copy. That's great. Let's see what we have here. Oh, okay. This is a double. Great, fantastic. This is a double. This is The First Shots by Brendan Borrell. We saw this already on this channel. This is about the race to develop the COVID-19 vaccine. What have we got here? Heroic science, chaotic politics, billionaire and entrepreneurs, award-winning journalist Brendan Borrell brings the defining story of our times live through absorbing first-time reporting on the players leading to the fight against a vicious virus. The First Shots draws on exclusive high-level access, takes us inside the intense competition among brilliant, hard-driving scientists and the epic rivalries among Washington power players that shaped 18 months of fear, resolve, and triumph. And the triumph is real. Not one, but many vaccines with a gigantic efficacy rate in the 90s produced in almost no time at all, in a fraction of the time that we had ever seen it before, building on elements that had been in use already. So who is this author? Oh, he's young, very young. Good Lord. Look at that. That's our author. An Outside magazine correspondent, and has written on health, science, and business for The Atlantic, Bloomberg Businessweek, National Geographic, Wired, and the New York Times. He lives in L.A., and this is his first book. So that's the book that we got today. We had a long tour through periodicals, but this is our book, a double of this. So if one of you is really interested in this, I now have 2 copies. So I'd be happy to send you one. In the U.S. In the U.S. It's bad enough to be paying through the nose for a package that doesn't arrive in the U.S. That is now the rule. In the U.S., the Postal Service announced a few weeks ago, yeah, we're gonna drastically decrease the quality of our services, and oh yeah, we're going to charge you more. So international mailing, I'm afraid, is off the table. But if you're in the U.S. and you feel like reading this, if it strikes your sweet spot, I have an extra copy. I'd be happy to send it to you. But anyway, this video's gone on long enough, hasn't it? Good Lord. I'm going to wrap it up. You've had a tour through my periodicals and 1 book, so I'm going to wrap this up. But if I get more mail, I'll come right back. Thank you, BookTube.